Hi everyone, Mindthany Change Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a video about 10 times I've changed my mind on albums. I have a lot of strong opinions on music, and I've delivered some opinions on opinions over the years as well since I started. And one idea, one thought or theory I've had about opinions since I started doing this that I've held very closely to my heart and have mentioned at least several times in a variety of different videos is that opinions change. Opinions are merely based on perception, and your perception is due to change as you age, as you gather and gain new experiences in life. I'm finally starting to get to the point where I have so many records in the past that I've reviewed that now that I look at them, I'm like, I feel kind of different now. I feel kind of different. So don't consider this list as me kind of re-reviewing these records, because honestly, I'm completely happy with the reviews that I put out at the time that I dropped the reviews. You know, I may have a particular perception of these albums right now that I'm about to tell you, but even that is due to change at some point in the future. But let's get into it. These are 10 albums that since I initially heard them, since I initially reviewed them, my opinion on them has changed. Yes, 2 Chainz, based on a true story. I remember my initial reaction, my initial review of this thing was really negative, very negative. I was talking about probably how not lyrical the album was, how quickly the album kind of gave into all of the trap cliches and so on and so forth. I probably saw 2 Chainz as really silly as well. But now that I revisit the album, there are a lot of bangers on this thing. Even the buttery, smooth tracks like No Lie and that one song with The Dreamer aren't that bad either. But the thing is, what really ended up selling this album for me is that it's so fucking funny. It's hilarious. 2 Chainz is, at this point in his career, was a really entertaining, sharp, and I don't know, like very charismatic, off the wall, bit of a goofball, I guess. You know, there's still tracks on this thing that I liked initially when I heard it, like the song Dope Peddler, that sound even better and rawer to my ears now. But there's so many tracks on this thing where he just sounds like, I don't know, a southern madman. Like the things lyrically that he comes up with are so ridiculous, they're so over the top, they're so silly that, I don't know, I can't help but find it lovable. You know, obviously I'm not saying this record is any kind of Illmatic or something like that, and I wonder if I really thought about it, would it even end up very high on my top 50 albums of the year list if I were to rewrite that. But what I'm merely saying here is that I don't think I gave this album the credit it deserved for being as funny and as unique as it is. Danny Brown, The Hybrid, an album that I initially did not review. I didn't cover this album at all the year that it came out, but I remember hearing this record the year that it came out because Danny Brown himself emailed me this shit. And when I heard it, I thought it was okay, you know, but it didn't really stop me in my tracks enough to want to talk about it in a formal review. But then, out of the blue, Danny drops this mixtape, this XXX, this 30 mixtape on Fool's Gold Records, and it's kind of funny. It's like he's kind of reinvented himself. Like, everything that was eccentric about that Hybrid project, which was a little faint, is just turned up to 11 on this new album over here. I actually had to do a bit of a double take because I was like, wait a second, do I know this guy? Have I heard this guy? Is this the same guy who emailed me that shit, like, a little while ago? Because this is crazy. This is insane. And obviously I loved XXX. I gave it a very positive review upon its release with my initial reactions to it. But this is one of those instances, and I'm sure you guys have had this happen to you before. This is one of those instances where a newer record kind of makes you rethink the past work of an artist. So the new record is great. It actually makes you take the artist a little more seriously than you did before. So then you go back to the older material that previously may have underwhelmed you, or maybe you didn't really know how to feel about it, and all of a sudden it just like clicks, and it's like, damn, this is great. This is amazing. I don't know why I didn't see what I see now in this, you know, because so there are some days where I don't want to listen to Atrocity Exhibition. I don't want to listen to XXX. There's some days when I just want to listen to freaking The Hybrid because it's so raw, it's so gritty, it's so like direct and to the point. Danny's hooks, despite them being very simple, a lot of them just click, a lot of them just stick with me really hard. I also think with Danny coming off a little less eccentric on this album, the storytelling element was turned up a little bit, and there are some really like grim, dark stories on this thing that, you know, still stand out to me as some of Danny's best work. work. Really, again, if you have not heard this thing and you do enjoy Danny's music, don't miss out on it like I did, or don't write it off like I did initially. This thing is great. The knife, shaking the habitual. You know, it's pretty funny. Some of you may be scratching your heads thinking, why is this here? Why is this here? Anthony, you loved the shit out of this album when it came out. Well, this isn't, just a list where I'm talking about records that I love more than I initially did when I first heard it. This is an example of an album that maybe I'm a little less hype on in retrospect. Because honestly, while I did really love this record when it initially came out, and there's still a lot of exciting tracks on this album for me, for sure, with no question. I can't remember the last time I've listened to this album all the way through, especially without skipping like that 20-minute interlude drone, very experimental sound piece in the middle of the record, the centerpiece of the album. Still, I think this is a very good Knife record. I think 90% of what I said in my original review still applies to how I feel about the album today. But, there are just some glaring spots that I think initially I kind of overlooked that are just like, wow, this is super indulgent and kind of a turnoff. Tom Waits, Bad As Me. Not one of my more popular or controversial reviews. I don't even think a lot of you guys have probably even seen this review. But Tom Waits is one of those singer-songwriters who at one point in my life, like college or so, he was a god to me. He was a fucking god. I thought he was just a genius of songwriting, of production, of instrumental palette. Loved the versatility of the man's voice. And at one point, I think I owned almost every CD or album that he had ever put out. So, of course, getting into my reviewing on YouTube, this is my first opportunity to review a Tom Waits record. So I'm really excited. It's like, whoa, hey, what the hell? I love Tom Waits. Or it's been a while, actually, at this point, since Tom Waits had put out a full-length album of new material. So I think I ended up giving it a 7. And, I thought it was pretty good, but now that I revisit it, and again, not that I was crazy about it initially, but I feel like the things that sort of made it sound somewhat weak in his discography, in my opinion, sound even weaker right now. I actually think it's one of his worst albums, to be completely honest. I think there are very little in the way of compelling, unique instrumentals on this thing. Actually, as far as instrumental palettes go, it kind of feels like Tom Waits is just kind of playing the hits, as it were, from beginning to end on the record. This is actually Tom Waits' first album, in my opinion, where, since he kind of reinvented himself on records like Swordfish Trombones, as well as Rain Dogs, where he didn't come through with a new sound, a new concept, a new idea. He didn't forge anything in terms of something refreshing or creative. So again, he's rehashing a lot of ideas instrumentally, and I think some of his worst songs and vocal performances turn up on this thing. I don't know purely if it's his singing or if it's the production, but a lot of his performances just sound so out of whack and overbearing on the instrumentals. It feels almost disconnected in a way. Kind of like he's doing just some bad off-kilter karaoke over some generic Tom Waitsian musical pastiche. There are songs that initially I didn't like that I like even less now, like Last Leaf, which I think is probably Tom's most patience-testing and long-winded and corny ballads to date. But what really sort of burns me is that on sites like Rate Your Music, this album is rated higher than albums of his in the past that I think are semi-objectively better, or at least more consistent, or at least more refreshing in terms of new sounds and ideas. Fucking Real Gone, Heart Attack and Vine, please. Yeah, I don't know, but given my opinion change on this record, I wonder if I'm even excited for another Tom Waits album again, because in retrospect, to me, it just kind of sounds like he was phoning it in, and I wonder if he'll ever be passionate about putting out a new album again, because it certainly doesn't sound to be the case here. Radiohead, the King of Limbs. The last time you guys saw me talk about Radiohead was in my Radiohead Worst to Best list, where I went over all of the band's major works and ranked them from what I thought was their most superior to their least superior records. And the King of Limbs, to kind of spoil it for you if you didn't already know, did rank at the bottom of the list, going under even Pablo Honey. So some of you may be pissed off about that. I understand, and that's fine. But the reason I add Radiohead onto this list is because if it wasn't already obvious from my talking points in that video, while I was never crazy about The King of Limbs to begin with, it's clearly one of Radiohead's weakest releases. I think I like it even less than I did when I originally heard it. I think I gave a 6 out of 10 to this thing, which, you know, it means I came out of it sort of enjoying it, sort of liking it. But nowadays, the record just seems so scant, it seems so rigid, it seems so flat, it seems so lifeless, it seems so non-essential to the band's artistic progression. It seems like a weird dead end or detour that wasn't really complete or was like a little ill-conceived. The fact that there was a mob of Radiohead fans who assumed that there was another album or EP or some extra tracks that were going to release from this thing around the corner, coming out of nowhere, is sort of indicative of that. I'll say again, like I said in my Radiohead Worst to Best video, that the live version of this album that they dropped not too long after is actually, I think, superior in terms of performance, the mix, the sound of the instrumentation, the visceral feel of these songs. So it's not like there are no great ideas here. I just think the execution really left a lot to be desired. So yeah, I like it even less. The Beastie Boys Hot Sauce Committee Part 2, the Beastie Boys' final record, MCA, Rest in Peace. I made it pretty clear in my Best Albums of the Year list when this album dropped that this record did not sit with me as positively as it did when I initially heard it. So that already has been kind of made public, but I wanted to include it here because, you know, this is just one of those moments, and I'm sure it's happened to you too, where, you know, initially an album hits you and it's sort of exciting, it's crazy, especially when it's an artist who, just like Tom Waits, the Beastie Boys were a group who I grew up listening to, and I own and admire a great deal of their discography, you know, even Hello Nasty, which, you know, a lot of people aren't that crazy about. But, you know, this one I really wanted to love it. I really wanted to be excited for it. You know, I was technically very early on in my reviewing career, as it were. And, you know, there's still a lot of good things about the album. I think the production is really creative and detailed, but, you know, lyrically, hook-wise, this is not one of the Beastie Boys' more solid releases. You know, certainly it's better than the Five Boroughs, but my opinion on this album will most likely forever be not quite as positive as it was when I initially reviewed and initially talked about the album. C'est la vie. Earl Sweatshirt. I don't like shit. I don't go outside. This has been one of those albums that, for a little while after the release of my review, people were dogging me and dogging me and dogging me and being like, oh, Anthony doesn't like Earl Sweatshirt. I don't like shit. It's so great. It's so great. It's so great. My opinion on this record, though, hasn't chased after me in the same way that, like, my Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy opinions have. But you know, there have been some moments when I've been curious to come back to this album. And in doing so, I realized some things about the record that I don't think I initially gave it credit for. Sure, you know, there are still some moments with the songwriting and with the lack of, you know, real tangible structure to these songs that is still kind of a turnoff. But at the time, I didn't quite get into just how dark and nihilistic this album is. And I gotta tell you, that quality about it, I think not only makes it really unique because, I mean, Earl's perception on the world and kind of just the nastiness of his attitude on this album really stands out, really makes him an artist marching to the beat of his own drum. I'm pretty sure I critiqued the production pretty hard when I initially reviewed this thing too, but listening to it now, I admire more just like the nihilistic mood of Earl's lyrics and the album overall. I just kind of like the lo-fi, weird, wonky, kind of noisy, very skeletal aesthetic of the instrumentals here. I think it adds to that nihilism. I think it adds to that nastiness. And I guess another thing that hit me about the album, and maybe not necessarily a good thing, is that damn, there are so many moments where there's like violence toward women on here. It's kind of interesting now for me to think of this record in context of the Odd Future hype train, because Tyler certainly made his concessions to make his music just a little more palatable, not quite as politically incorrect as his career and his visibility in the music industry grew and grew and grew. Earl, meanwhile, from his debut mixtape to this, only seems to have gotten edgier and darker and more disgusting and more vile. And if I can praise Nick Cave or G.G. Allen for trolling the dregs of depravity, then I can praise Earl Sweatshirt for doing it too. Next, Mac DeMarco 2, his big breakout album. I enjoyed some of the stuff off of his previous project and his Makeout videotape material, but when he broke with this album, it did kind of hit me in a mixed bag sort of way. There were some tracks that to me felt kind of redundant, like Mac was going for this uniformly bland, kind of jangly, dreamy sound, where some songs just didn't really stand out, really paled in comparison to others. Of course, there were some tracks on here that I really loved and still stand today as some of my favorite Mac DeMarco tracks, My Kind of Woman being one. And it's these cuts that actually made me come back to the record years later and actually come to realize that, actually it's a bit more diverse of an album than I gave it credit for. It's way more solid of a record than I gave it credit for. Again, I don't know if I revised my year-end list, would it rank that high, but my feelings toward this record are definitely more positive than they were when I initially reviewed it. And I mean, I did like it overall. I think I gave it a 6 or something, and I would say today I'm a little higher on that scale. This is also thanks in part to me having to re-listen to the album when I reviewed Mac DeMarco's latest record, which I really enjoyed, very good album. But when going back and listening to the old stuff, just to kind of, get a grip of where he was at back then and how he traveled to get where he is now, I was just like, wow, there's some really great tracks on this that originally just didn't really leave that much of an impression on me. And you know what? There's some albums like that. Sometimes you just got to come back to it with a different mindset, just be in a different place, and all of a sudden it just kind of clicks for you. I gotta shout out Death Grip's Government Plates on here. Yes, Death Grip's Government Plates. Probably one of my more infamous Death Grips reviews, because I guess it's my most negative Death Grips review. I caught a lot of heat on this. Review. I don't quite get so much harassment over my thoughts on this record today, but originally there was a huge backlash with Death Grips fans with my opinions on this record. And while there's still tracks on here where I am somewhat disappointed with Ride kind of repeating a verse or repeating lyrics, or he's just simply being copied and pasted onto another section of the album, or just kind of his lack of a vocal performance that's really all that compelling, or with some of the instrumentals being super repetitive, super obnoxious, super, God, I don't even know what to say to describe feels like a wheel. Still don't like that song to this day. And I still don't really like the title track. I still don't really like Big House. But having said that, I still think some of Death Grip's most iconic tracks turn up on this project. And in retrospect, I think the positive moments on this record outshine the bad moments. I guess I came away from this album originally understanding or feeling that way, but I guess that opinion is even stronger today. Because Anne Bonny and Birds and You Might Think He Loves You, as well as Fuck Is Watching, are still some of my favorite Death Grips tracks today. And I cannot deny that drop on I'm Overflow. That is just amazing. Finally on this list, it's MIA's Maya, which on a couple occasions in the past I have admitted and already said that I've rethought my opinion on this album. I enjoy this album more than I did originally. Before the release of her latest album, Maya was consistently seen as MIA's worst project, and in retrospect, I could kind of see why people received it that way. It came right off of Kala, which is easily her most accessible and radio-friendly record, had the big hit Paper Planes on it, and then she follows it up with what was essentially at the time her most experimental, off-the-wall, abrasive, insane, and challenging album. Of course the response was going to be negative among her mainstream fans, but even music critics fucking hated the thing. And I feel like my enjoyment of this album now is due to two things: having to revisit it to review her subsequent projects, and also, Death Grips. Because if I'm being honest with myself, a lot of the bombastic, off-the-wall, loud, buzzing, abrasive production on this project is kind of a precursor to what Death Grips has done on multiple records. Sure, there are some moments on this thing where lyrically MIA is not delivering her best, isn't delivering her brightest, but instrumentally this is so ahead of the curve. Not only that, but I think MIA was also ahead of the curve on a few tracks when she was kind of diving into the topic of internet culture and the way that it was affecting our society, the way that we communicated. The album art itself is kind of a play on just how overwhelming the information age could be. And I feel like instrumentally she was trying to create that same sense and had done it successfully, even though at the time I and many other people didn't realize it. And I'm gonna leave it at that. You know, this was not me trying to re-review these records or anything like that. This is me just simply stating, you know, outright that my opinions have changed, just like your opinions have most likely changed on a variety of records. However, since there are over 1 million people who watch this YouTube channel, I figure I would just kind of lay down some significant moments on some high-profile and not so high-profile records where, you know, that has happened to me, and just kind of, you know, reach out to you guys and let you know this is a normal thing. And I feel like, you know, if you're going to be a critic or a reviewer of music, you have to constantly be thinking and reevaluating the way that you listen to music and what music you've heard in the past and how you felt about it and so on and so forth. Because times change, perceptions change, people change, the artistic landscape changes, and if you're going to continue to be relevant, continue to be on top, continue to grow, then you have to kind of go along with that evolution. And that's the video. I hope you guys got a lot out of it, and I enjoyed making it too, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Transition. Have you given a listen to any of these albums? What are your opinions on them? Did you love them, hate them? Why? Do my thoughts changing on them make sense to you? Do they anger you? Does it give you hope for the future? Are there any albums that you wish I talked about in this segment? I'm sure there are. And let me know down in the comments. Other videos next to my head I think you should check out. Subscribe to the channel and official website too. Forever.